Sometimes I think that the education I received in the co-ops was as important as the education I received in the university itself.
It formed much of my views of life in terms of everyone helping out, everyone is a team, everyone is very equal, there's no class distinctions.
I was the homeowner, I was the landlord, I was the roommate, and I was a 19-year-old, kid.
The Intercooperative Council, an organization now comprised of 18 houses and serving nearly 600 members. Like many great things, it began small. The roots of the Intercooperative Council date back to 1930, the Great Depression, a time when sharing food and housing was the only viable option. Over 25% of workers were unemployed, and those who had jobs were finding it hard to afford even 2 meals per day. Many people felt that democracy was failing. University of Michigan students were hit especially hard. Affordable housing was dwindling. Tuition and food costs were on the rise. More and more students dropped out simply because the cost of living was too high. Fortunately, in 1930, Charles Orr and Leonard Kimball came up with an idea. Along with some friends, they started the Michigan Socialist Club. They realized it would be cheaper if they shared housing and meals.
The guys of the Michigan Socialist Club really firmly believed in a certain way that human beings should live, that they should be treated. And that's why I think the co-op idea appealed to them so much. It was an opportunity to put into exercise some of their values.
The group rented a house on East Ann Street in August of 1932 and charged each member $2 per week for room and board. They shared food, labor, and most importantly, decisions. Each house member had an equal voice in the decision-making process. Working together proved too effective to limit to just one house. In 1932, member Cher Qureshi started the Wolverine Eating Co-op. Soon, 500 students were stocking, cooking, eating, and saving money, together. In 1935, the movement continued to grow. Eldon Ham and Cal Cressine convinced Reverend and Mrs. Pickerel to share their home with 8 students, who dined in the basement and slept in the attic. Eldon brought sacks of potatoes from his family's farm for the boys to eat. By 1937, Reverend Pickerel and Cal Cressine had started the Rochdale Co-op in a house on the corner of Hill Street and Oxford Road. The house was named after the birthplace of the Rochdale Principles, a co-op started in 1844 by a group of weavers in Rochdale, England.
We were a generation of hope, and our mission was to do things better, and we knew we could. We weren't depressed in the Depression. We were alive and working.
The houses realized that if they joined together, they could help each other find new members, buy food, and form even stronger connections. A group of women met with Reverend Pickerel to begin a cooperative house of their own. Palmer House, the first local co-op for women, was established in 1939.
Particularly as women, we were several generations ahead of ourselves in terms of taking hold of our lives, being serious about ourselves, insisting on equal treatment and getting it.
Palmer, Rochdale, and Michigan houses, along with the Wolverine Eating Co-op, formed the Campus Cooperative Council, the first glimmering of the Intercooperative Council. In 1939, 3 new houses were formed, Pickerel, Congress, and Stalker, expanding the council even further. Then, the name changed. Co-op living required work, but co-op members could easily see the benefits of sharing work.
There were a number of things that we joined together on, where we would get services from or get food from, things like collecting trash. I collected it from all the houses, and it was wonderful, the way it worked. Nobody pissed and moaned about why they had to do whatever their job was. There's something about working together or living together that there was just a kind of togetherness that I can't put into words.
The years just before the U.S. entered World War II marked a boom for student co-ops. Nationwide, there were nearly 300 student co-ops on 144 college campuses. In 1939, ICC members drafted a constitution and started centralized food purchasing. 1940 and 41 saw the start of 5 new houses in Ann Arbor. Over 250 students per year were able to come to college because of affordable co-op housing. And with this new population came the potential to work together on an even greater scale.
So they took the economic principle of each individual house and applied it to a group of houses, which is you pool your resources, whatever those are, and you're all going to come out ahead. And so they federated, basically, because that was a big step. If they hadn't taken that step, a lot of those co-ops might have just disappeared forever. The whole concept might have at some point just disappeared. But because they were a unified group, that enabled them to meet the challenges and the difficulties that World War II brought to them in terms of losing their leases, losing their members.
However, even a unified federation could not escape the devastating effects of World War II. As young men joined up by the tens of thousands, membership in the houses decreased by 2/3. By the end of the war, only 4 co-ops remained in Ann Arbor. And those few remaining houses had new problems. Developers started buying up houses near campus for war workers and those soon returning from the war. It was harder and harder for members to find houses to rent, and rented houses could easily be sold out from under them. They had to find a way to buy houses if their movement was to survive. In the summer of 1943, the co-opers found a house at 816 South Forest that they thought they could afford to buy. The ICC members gathered loans from house accounts and from their relatives for the down payment, but it wasn't quite enough. Finally, they found help from the Ann Arbor Co-op Society and Professor A.K. Stevens. Stevens urged them to buy the property and co-signed a $500 loan to back it up. The Co-op Society, which ran a grocery store and gas station, also provided funding. The new house became known as A.K. Stevens Co-op. In the fall of '44, the men of Robert Owen Co-op couldn't even find a house to rent. They wanted to buy a house, but ICC's resources were drained after buying Stevens. Just when it seemed that Owen would be dissolved into other houses, an anonymous donor came to the rescue. A house was found at 1017 Oakland, and Owen House became a permanent part of the ICC. Though most of the other early houses were casualties of the war years, the purchase of Stevens and Owen allowed the ICC to survive. It cemented itself by incorporating in 1944.
The whole concept changed in terms of purchasing houses rather than renting them. After the World War II, we just kept buying.
The war was over, and the demand for co-ops was back.
In 1942 to 43, the enrollment at U of M probably was around 10,000. When I came back, it was like 25,000 in 1946.
To keep up with the population boom, the ICC bought 2 new houses and named both after members who lost their lives in the war, Harry Osterweil and Johnny Nakamura. Honoring Johnny Nakamura was the latest in ICC's stand against the discrimination prevalent at the time. When people of Japanese descent were being forced into internment camps, the ICC stood behind its many Japanese-American co-op members. Co-ops also refused to discriminate against Jewish or African Americans. A group of early co-opers helped start the Interracial Society, bringing students of different backgrounds together. A Methodist student group started Muriel Lester House in 1940, specifically as an opportunity for interracial living.
We had people from all over the world, Turkey, Chinese, Japanese. It was just a wonderful experience to recognize, the common humanity, no matter where you came from.
And in 1944, the ICC successfully fought a neighborhood petition requesting the removal of African American members of Palmer House. The ICC newsletter, The Cooperator, gave the organization's firm reply.
Religious or racial discrimination has no place in the co-op movement. Indeed, we should make an effort to add to our membership those who might be discriminated against elsewhere. We must in no way make applicants or members feel that they will be judged by any standard but that of cooperation.
So we in the co-op, we were all like citizens of the world. We didn't care what ethnicity we were, what sex we were, or, how much money we had or anything. We were just, that was our belief.
Despite relentless opposition to their stance on inclusion, the co-ops stood strong.
There was a time when the regents thought about closing the co-ops because of their political controversy associated with them. The main deterrent to that thinking was that every year the grade point averages of all the residence houses, the dorms, the league houses, everything, were all reported. And the co-ops always came out on top with a grade point average. So I think the regents realized that there was something going on there that was right.
The organization had grown, and with this growth, a new discussion emerged.
A.K. Stevens had been a source of continuity in co-op policy for a while, but he had just been an advisor, and he just wasn't always there. And we could feel by his presence that there was a need for continuity in co-op policy. And also there were some thoughts about expanding the co-ops. And it was felt that the students just weren't in a position, there wasn't anybody who was there to implement that process.
The discussion to hire a full-time staff person began.
We had weeks of debate as to whether to hire somebody, and it was a very deep split. We spent so much time resisting the university's attempts to control us that we felt that anybody else that came in was going to be somebody else that would control us.
The group finally reached a decision when they hired Luther Buckley as executive secretary. Originally from rural Kansas, Buckley had worked previously with the North American Student Cooperative League, the first national organization to connect student co-ops from around the U.S. and Canada. He seemed like just the right person for the ICC.
It's important to realize that he had a unique style. He considered himself to be a coach. He used that analogy, and throw out the ball, and people would either run with it or fumble it or whatever, and it wasn't his position to tell people what to do, but rather to offer suggestions and encouragement.
Things worked out so well that Buckley stayed with the council for 34 years. There were other changes in the 1950s. Lester became the first house where men and women could eat together. Brandeis House added family housing, and Mark 8, ICC's 8th purchase, became home to female graduate students in 1956. With their reputation as strongholds for democracy and equality, many of the ICC co-ops naturally became hubs for the social change movements of the 1960s. Osterweil House provided workers and supplies for the civil rights movement. Members of Vail, Owen, and Nakamura were active in protesting the Vietnam War. A local radical newspaper, the Ann Arbor Argus, was published at Nakamura in the late 1960s. Throughout the ICC's history, members chose house names that reflected their values. Lester House was named for lifelong British peace activist Muriel Lester, who twice visited the house. Stephen Vail, who as council president helped establish the co-op's independence from the university, was namesake for Vail House. Linder House was named after Benjamin Linder, who was killed by the Contra rebels in Nicaragua in 1987 while helping to construct a hydroelectric project to assist rural villagers. Other houses have been named in honor of socialist Eugene Debs, comedian and social critic Lenny Bruce, and African-American activists Sojourner Truth and Coretta Scott King. The civil rights and Vietnam War eras brought a new sense of power to the students' lives. They rejected many of their parents' values and created their own counterculture. They felt that they could build a new world based on peace, equality, and caring. They flocked to co-ops, which had always emphasized member control and equality. Co-op houses suddenly had waiting lists hundreds of names long. In response, the ICC grew. Tri-House, Debs, Minis, Bruce, and Xanadu joined the council. But the biggest leap came from a brand new structure planned by the ICC members themselves, the North Campus Co-op. The project took over 10 years. First, student co-ops around the country worked with the Cooperative League of the USA to make federal loan funds available for student co-ops. ICC members then applied for and received a $1.2 million loan from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to build a large co-op near U of M's North Campus. Building began in 1968, and when it was completed in 1970, North Campus Co-op added 216 members to the ICC in one fell swoop. By 1973, the ICC was one of the largest centers of campus cooperative housing in the U.S. ICC members continued to find ways to take control of their lives and their co-ops. By the early 1970s, all 22 ICC co-ops were co-ed. However, Xanadu's experiment with co-ed rooms was abandoned after negative national publicity. Other ICC projects reflected the issues of the day. In 1975, the ICC board endorsed a boycott by the United Farm Workers of grapes, wines, and lettuce. In 1978, Lester House became vegetarian, and a women's committee was formed to eliminate sexism in the co-ops. ICC members also worked to solidify the larger student co-op movement. In 1968, ICC hosted a national co-op conference in Ann Arbor. Soon after, ICC helped to start NASCO, the North American Students of Cooperation. NASCO is still providing education and support to campus co-ops around the U.S. and Canada.
Every year, NASCO holds its annual institute here in Ann Arbor, where hundreds and hundreds of co-opers from around the nation and Canada will come and join together for several days of classes, dozens and dozens of classes on cooperative development. It's an incredible experience where people get together and share what they know.
The ICC co-ops have always hosted those coming into town for the conference, allowing members to hear new ideas and advice. The Council's growth in the 1970s seemed unstoppable, but ICC members in the mid-70s felt the organization had grown enough and voted down the purchase of several houses. Instead, they dedicated a $1 million loan to fixing up the existing houses. But nobody saw the financial crisis looming on the horizon.
It was a time when many people were leaving Michigan. The auto industry was collapsing. There were huge vacancies all over Ann Arbor, including with the co-ops. The saying went, "Will the last person to leave Michigan please turn off the lights?"
The ICC looked for changes they could make in spite of the economic climate. The first change put into effect focused on King House. Instead of family housing, it became something like a retirement home for older co-opers. North Campus Co-op had collapsed, and by the summer of 1984, their membership dwindled to just a few.
I came in as a consultant and helped them to figure out how to change North Campus from 9 houses and 2 boarding co-ops to 2 houses. They had made already the decision to change the room arrangement to all rooms optionally being single and being for graduate students largely.
The changes at King and North Campus helped stabilize the organization once again, and Luther Buckley was able to retire, with his successor Jim Jones stepping in as only the second executive secretary in 1985. Jim helped the ICC streamline the board structure. He also reorganized the staff, and as the recession passed, helped the organization to once again focus on expansion. Reaching out to the National Co-op Bank in Washington, D.C., the ICC was able to refinance the entire organization and purchase what is now Luther House. At the same time, they sold Xanadu to a fraternity, receiving the house to become Black Elk as a down payment. The ICC was on a roll, and there was no slowing down. Linder, Kagawa, Ruth's, and Gregory houses were all purchased within a 7-year period, as well as the ICC's current office building on William Street. Some issues never go away. The houses have to stay full, and the charges need to stay affordable. Keeping costs down relies on sweat equity. When members do the food buying, cooking, cleaning, and small repairs, a lot of money is saved. Education has always been a mainstay in the ICC. Members must learn to